Thank you, sir. It was November 18th, 2015. 3 armed robbers stormed one of our banks, became one of the most violent robberies our branch had seen. At the end of the episode, they got away with $50,000. So the question I want to ask you when we're talking about threat hunting, incident response, is are you prepared to face the enemy? And maybe more importantly, are your employees prepared? The people on the front line who are going to, receive the email, click the link, notice something unusual. So in this talk, we're going to explore how do you prepare your teams, how do you prepare your employees to face adversaries in your environment. Turns out one of the 3 suspects ended up being one of the most, FBI top 10 most wanted, and he was on that list for about 3 months. It was captured in January of 18. It turns out when you take something from a bank, and I'll leave it at this, there's things that we can do to figure out where you went after you left the bank. All right, so this suspect was captured. All 3 suspects were apprehended primarily based on the fact that our employees followed the procedures. Despite the episode, we had practiced, trained, and prepared for that particular event. They followed through, led to the arrest of these 3 suspects. I like this quote in particular, the very last sentence. If you've ever read Ender's Game, there is no teacher but the enemy. You're not going to know how they're going to act on your network or operate until they show up. So we can do our best to prepare, we can do our best to train, but in reality, like you've heard in some of the talks before, when the incident goes down, it's a very dynamic process. So there really is no teacher but the enemy when they arrive on your network. So my name is Casey Smith. You can connect with me on Twitter @SubT. The title of this talk is Train Like You Fight. So I work for a regional bank in Colorado. We have about 3,000 employees. And my primary role is to test our defensive systems. So I'm a threat intelligence analyst. So I actually sit right next to our blue team. I operate the red team, and Travis, who's here, sits right next to me. I'm like, hey, did you see that? No. Okay, well, let's fix this. Let's tune our systems. Okay, so we're constantly testing and preparing our environment to see and act out actors, indicators on our network. So that's my primary role. It's a lot of fun, actually. So our team matured from physical security. So if you think about the physical security space, we have robbery training. We have mock robberies our teams can conduct. We have procedures. We have alarms. We have vaults. The physical security environment is instrumented to handle this type of event, a robbery. Okay, camera verification. Every morning when the branch opens up, one of the things our employees do is they check the camera. Is it recording? Okay? Is it actually not pointed at the wall or the floor? Is it actually pointed in the right direction? The last thing you want to have happen is the FBI show up and say, we need pictures of the suspect, and you've got a picture of a wall. Okay? So think of your incident response tools. You want to train them, tune them. If you can tell me you can find a hash on your network, prove it to me. I'm going to drop a hash in your environment. Tell me what systems it landed on. Okay? So we're going to take the things we've learned from physical security. We're going to try and apply those to the InfoSec space. A lot of ways to process threat intelligence. For us, there's an FSI-SAC for banks. And the way we process threat intelligence is we basically say, okay, that happened at a bank in Missouri. What happened if it showed up on our network? So what would happen if that event occurred in our environment? The second thing we ask is, are we prepared? Can we detect it? Can we prevent it? How do we respond? All right, so you heard talk about like the Powlix malware earlier today, or fileless malware, or memory resident malware. These are the type of things we're thinking, and our team creates or drafts prototypes that we can execute to tune our tools against. So my job is to be the threat that we hope never shows up on our network. Okay, so essentially we do a lot of threat emulation. We simulate, we get a report, we read about a particular virus or malware, and we write prototypes and we run them in our network in production. Okay, now that's a lot of stuff I publish on GitHub, so you guys can follow my GitHub and run some of the same type of tools. They're not malicious. They're more like canaries, like Heather talked about earlier today. All right, so it's just something to make sure your tool sets are dialed in, that your rifle is sighted. Okay, so that's what we do. All right. When we talk about assumed compromise or assumed breach or whatever you want to call it, for us as a bank, it means you're going to get robbed. Okay, that you can't prevent that, At any given moment, a suspect could decide to enter our organization and steal money. Okay, that's just a fact we deal with. So what do? We instrument. We have cameras, alarms, vaults. So we've gone to the steps necessary to handle and absorb that particular event. Yep. There we go. All right, so my role for our team is I introduce artifacts into the network so they can hunt our activity. Okay, so again, like I mentioned earlier, if you can tell me you can detect a hash executed on a system or process A injected into process B, prove it to me. I'm going to run it. I'm going to run invoke shellcode in PowerShell, jump into explore.exe, and I want you to tell me which machines I did that on. Okay, so this is the way we train and practice for our teams. Here's what it looks like at a very, very high level. We run quarterly exercises. These are pre-approved drills that our incident responders, they don't know it's coming. Or maybe a small number of them know it's coming. We have executive buy-in. All right, so we have pre-approved missions that we want to accomplish. And I only had time to really talk about 4 of those missions today, but I'm happy. I'm going to be here for the rest of the summit, so I want to share if you have questions about other exercises we do. My job, or my role, is attack to get caught. Okay, red team doesn't win by beating blue team. Okay, red team wins when red team teaches blue team about a gap and blue team then goes out and detects an actual adversary on your network. That's a win for the red team. Okay, so that we want to get caught. We want to be detected. We want to be tracked in the network. Okay, so let me take you through 4 simple scenarios. I think everybody can relate to these exercises. Again, each quarter we run a specific mission: spearfishing, weaponized documents, credential theft, command and control. And we're not going to have a lot of time to go deep dive, but I want you to understand what we're doing when we conduct these tests in our environment. So spearfishing. We do our own. We write some PowerShell. We get a Linux server for like 58 cents an hour, spin it up. We can run the exercise. It's trivial. There's minimal cost to do this. What's different about this is I'm not testing users. I'm not having users click a link and end up at a CBT. Not helpful, okay? What I want to do is I want to test the security team response. Can you detect the fish? How can you block the attachments or the links or whatever it is that's entered in our environment? These exercises are a test of our security team. Here's an example. We ran a test, and one of the analysts detected a malicious link at 7:56. Let me know in the chat. I'm going to block this. By 7:56 and 42 seconds, employees were clicking the link. Okay? But what you see there is it was blocked. Rapid response. Okay? So they detected our activity, and we were able to contain the incident much quicker because they were able to find the indicators. Now when we do spearfishing exercises, we rely on what I call distributed hunting. I grew up in Colorado, and there's a lot of difference between the way you hunt pheasant and the way you hunt an elk. Okay? When you hunt pheasant, you line up in the field and walk across the field. So when you hunt spearfishing or fishing attacks, I want employees to let us know. All of our employees have a button in their Outlook. This look weird? Click spam reporting. Deletes the message from their inbox, sends it to the security team. They get feedback. Thanks. That was actually really a bad thing. Thanks for reporting it to us. Or no, that's okay. We scan the attachment, whatever, you can open it. Okay? So we're pushing our hunting out to the edge for these type of exercises. So when we run a red team test, it may be the security team that catches us, but it may actually just be an employee that thinks this looks a little strange in their inbox. So we rely on that. These are the questions we ask post-incident. First of all, how were we detected? So we sent a phishing email into your environment. What was the indicator? Who caught it? An employee? The security analyst? The filter? How was it detected? How quickly was it detected? Time's an important metric, right? Are you getting better or are you getting worse? You can use time as a really good metric to see how well you're detecting these incidents and hunting and looking for things. Were we contained? What caused this particular phishing attack to get through the filters? What would the impact have been? Did a domain admin receive this? Did an accounting staff receive this? What were the common attributes? Sender, subject line, attachment name, sending IP address, whatever it might be. We're trying to train our teams to look for those common artifacts and surface those and then write rules to provide feedback on other incidents that might happen in the future. Okay, so when we run those drills, those are the things that we do as a follow-up. Those are the questions they have to answer. How did that email get into our environment? We feed that back in, tune our systems. Another exercise we run is Weaponize Documents. We've all experienced this. So yeah, we write, Word and Excel spreadsheets with macros, and we execute them, and we see what happens. When they run shellcode and they call back to Kali Linux, right? We run that stuff on our production network. So these are some of the indicators that we use to detect this in our environment. New file on network. Hey, that binary has never executed on any other endpoint in the environment. We might want to look at it. New suspicious parent process. Okay, did Word spawn command prompt or Word spawn PowerShell? Processes that contain the word zip in the path or the profile in the path. Suspicious executions. Who am I? Doesn't get executed that often. It depends on your environment, right? But like set_hc, net user, queue user just shows you who else is logged into the system. Set_hc attacks, those are rare executions. So if I see these happening from a weaponized document, those are the indicators we're hunting for. What it looks like in my environment, kind of like a picture of the suspect you saw before, is Microsoft Word spawns command prompt, spawns who am I. That's the workflow we see in our environment. Okay, so again, just like a suspect, we have a workflow we process on detection. How do we do this? There's a lot of different tools to do this. Primarily, we're looking at the endpoint visibility. So endpoint execution events, new unapproved files introduced into the network, suspicious network connections, IPs, whatever artifacts it might be. And we actually introduce artifacts to make sure that our tools are tuned and trained properly so that we can detect actual actors in our environment. Okay, credential theft, another mission we run. So this one's actually very difficult to detect. There's a number of tools you can use to try and detect, did somebody steal credentials? I'll take you through a couple scenarios here. All right, but without instrumentation, this can be a little bit more difficult to try and understand. Sometimes it's noisy, right? So everybody here, I heard earlier, Mimikatz. There was a talk about from in-game about Mimikatz detection and auto runs and invoke Mimikatz. Everybody, I'm guessing, has heard of that. That runs Mimikatz inside of PowerShell.exe. Our team wrote a tool that we use install util because everybody's watching PowerShell, so we just run it in another .NET tool. Okay. So the fact is, though, however you run Mimikatz, there's actually ways to detect that that particular event has occurred, or whatever credential dumping tool of the day it might be. Okay? The question I have for you is, in a lab or in a test environment, have you ever actually executed Mimikatz, for example, and recorded activity to see if you can detect it? It's probably worth doing, with permission, of course, right? On a dedicated system, if you've instrumented your environment to detect this, take a look at the artifacts. Here's what it looks like in our environment when we run, Mimikatz and I execute it inside of install util. Turns out there's a lot of dependencies that Mimikatz brings with it. Okay, so there's some more indicators I'll publish online, but this gives you the sense that install util may have say 5, 10 dependencies. All of a sudden it starts loading 32 other DLLs. That's a suspicious indicator, and specifically the ones that Mimikatz might use. So that's the way we'll run that tool. We'll see what our indicators show. Can we detect it in our environment? So we're trying to understand, did credential theft happen? Now, sometimes it happens offline. Okay, so this is sort of all the rage now is, I'm not going to drop Mimikatz in your network. The network's instrumented. You're going to detect the binary. You'll detect execution. All I have to do is run Mimikatz against the dump file offline. Okay, so here's an example. Everybody knows, in Task Manager, you can right-click, dump a process. If you have admin rights in the box, you can dump LSAS process. And now you just exfil a file that's got the credentials inside of it. What are the indicators here? Okay, how would I know that that happened? Well, we look at things like cross-process connections. All right, so we're looking for, create remote thread, essentially. Did something connect to LSAS, change permissions? That's almost always a bad thing. Okay, so from an indicator perspective, we're able to detect, I don't know exactly what happened, but I know something just connected to LSAS and dumped that process and wrote it to disk. We should probably go explore that, or we should go look through our logs and find those indicators in our environment. All right, command and control. So we looked at spearfishing attacks that we test. We looked at weaponized documents, credential theft. What about command and control? Here's a couple of things that our team does. Proxy hunting. Proxies can be a huge source of information for hunting. If you're not hunting in your proxy logs, And Rob really challenged us to say, sort of define hunting and what does that mean? For our team, it means you're not waiting for an alert. You're going to look for something. Okay, so you're going to just get in a conference room and go look in the proxy logs and say, how would I detect bad activity in the proxy logs? Okay, here's a couple tips. User agent strings. Dump those out. Look at unique user agent strings. Look for what's normal and look for the outliers. Okay, there's a lot of good information in there about weird stuff executing on your network. Mime type downloads, right? Did they download a jar file, an exe, a DLL? A lot of times the actors leave the Mime type, so if you drop an exe or DLL, you can detect that in your proxy logs. Okay, so we've written some custom scripts that we use to, harvest our logs and go do custom queries. DNS, we've heard about DNS. One of the things our team does is look at QFDs, question-focused data sets, very simple rules. Have I seen the domain, yes or no? Okay, that's all I want. I have a database that tells me this is the domain I saw, this is the date I saw it. So I'm just answering a simple question. So we pull all of the communications out of our proxy logs and build a simple data set from DNS. Those are actual communications, not the DNS lookups, but an actual connection request. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of, we've run these tests. Oh, bear with me one second here. There we go. Okay, so after action reporting, we run one of these drills as a red team. What is the follow-up? What's the takeaway? What's the feedback? So the first question we would say, did the team, did you detect the attack, or were you hunting and you found this activity in the logs? If so, how quickly did you respond? Did you detect the attack in the way it was expected? If I expected you to get caught in the email filter and you caught me in the proxy log, that let's take that and maybe use that as a way to learn other ways of detecting our environment. So we expected the attack to be detected one way, and maybe it was detected a completely different way. We sit down in a conference room, red team, blue team. We sit down and we go over the logs. At 4:53, I did this. What do you see in the logs at 4:53? We can comb through the noise and practice and drill our teams on what they actually saw. Okay? Does the data in the logs and the data in the log and the network traffic, does it meet the expectations? Do you have gaps? It's one of the best things these exercises bring up for us is we didn't see it at all. And it's better to find that out before the adversary shows up if your logs are not working properly, if your camera is pointed at the ceiling. Okay? Those are things you want to learn. And then what can be done to react more effectively next time? What do we learn? How do we feed that back to the blue team to get better? Okay, so I'm going to leave you with this as far as thoughts on training like you fight. We've all got tools. The question I'm asking you is, are they working? Are you practicing? Are they accurate? If you've played sports, you've had like in football, you have a scout team, okay, that mimics the defense. If you did acting or theater, you did rehearsals. Right? If you're going to sight in your rifle, you go to the range. Right? So you have a lot of tools. Test those tools. Use some expertise on your teams to make sure you can catch those canaries or those indicators. So when the time comes, they're working properly. You can rely on them. You can trust the tool set. All right, I love this quote. Fear not the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. So somebody gets really, really good at hunting in the proxy. I mean really, really good. They're the go-to person. Okay, so that's the kind of expertise and practice you want to prepare your teams and drill for your teams. I've got some references. Like they said earlier, these slides will be published. Questions, feedback again. Connect with me on Twitter @SubT. I hope this is helpful. Rob, do I have time for questions? I know we're tight on time, so. What's that? Okay. Questions? Helpful? Not helpful? Yes, sir. Back here.
You mentioned that you're not looking to stay stealthy, right? But the attackers will try to be. Where do you draw the line between trying to be like stealthy like attackers, but still so that defenders will find you?
Okay, so the question was, I think if this is right, how do you remain stealthy but also introduce artifacts that would be detected? It's a great question, and we try, like I said earlier, we try and use, for example, threat intelligence reports. So we take actual attacks and try and mimic those, right? So we try and use things that are known, like Powlix, the run DLL calling it, MS HTML application. So we try and focus on actual indicators, and that's I guess the best place we draw the line. I mean, if you look at, for example, like robberies, like most robberies are just note passers, right? They don't end up like the robbery I talked about at the beginning. So we try and train our environment to be what is actually happening in the field, what are we actually seeing, and what can we detect? Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
We also employ analysts. I saw in your Twitter feed that you recently manipulated the system log. Do you use analysts in your mission?
Yeah, so that's one area I'm exploring. So the question was some of the tools that I publish on Twitter or GitHub, do I use those in our missions? Those are usually a direct result of something we did. So one of the things the question was on Twitter, recently we started tampering with, as a red team, your logs. So sysmon, injecting into sysmon, or just shutting logs down completely, because I know analysts rely on those logs. So we use those techniques, and we would say, how would we detect this activity if, say, logs were gone? Or we can't trust the logs. So yes, those most of what I post is a direct result of our tests. Does that answer the question? Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much for your time.